Joining us today is my friend and co-host Vladimir Putin. Welcome. Oh, I'm sorry, Guy Denton. Guy Benson? Guy Denton. Good to see you, my friend.
President Putin, right? As
Sorry.
as our own dear president referred to him recently.
Was it too soon? Too soon for that? I don't know.
It's never too soon on this show, Matt. I wouldn't be concerned.
I do have that clip that I want to share, but before we get into that, let me just you and I, the last time we spoke was literally minutes after that fateful presidential debate. We spoke late into the night, and then the next day I left town for like 9 or 10 days. So I've not been producing the content that a content provider such as myself needs to be doing. But thoughts since the last time we spoke, a lot has happened. Yet here we're still kind of having the same conversation we had last time. Should Biden get out? Have you changed? Has anything changed in your mind?
I think the only thing that's changed is that things have become more embarrassing for everyone involved over the last week and a half, Matt.
Including you and me. I mean, yes.
That's right, because we're the schmucks talking about it. We don't even get paid to be part of a DNC or anything like that. So here we are in our basements, Matt, and they're out there running the world and putting on this circus. But I'm sure we can get more into the specifics of all of that once you start pulling up some clips.
All right, well, let's do just that. So as we're recording this on Friday, so on Thursday evening, President Biden spoke at this NATO conference taking place. But it was actually he held a press conference. And I think he did pretty good during this press conference, all things considered, but he made some major flubs before it. This is the first, and I'll get your take on the other end.
And now I want to hand it over to the president of Ukraine, who has as much courage as he has determination. Ladies and gentlemen, President Putin. President Putin. He's going to beat President Putin. President Zelensky. I'm so focused on beating Putin, we got to worry about it. Anyway, Mr. President.
I'm better.
You are a hell of a lot better.
Question for you, Matt. Do you think him acknowledging the gaffe there makes it downplays it, takes away from it a bit, or actually makes it worse?
I think he had to. But the funny thing is that Putin got applause. If you go back and listen to the clip, he's like, President Vladimir Putin, and everyone's like, so it's like half the audience, maybe we're just going along with, just applauding because that's what you do. They didn't realize what happened. And then most of them, I think it's just polite. They knew that Biden had made a flub. And then, and they were like, well, I guess we have to applaud. Like, let's pretend, let's do what everyone in America has been doing for the last couple of years. Pretend that it didn't happen. Pretend that this isn't crazy. So they gave him the nice polite applause. Biden caught himself. I think it's better probably that he caught himself than that he didn't. And I think he had to say something at that point. And kudos to Zelensky for kind of recovering and making a little joke about it. But the obvious problem is that, like, Biden had such a horrible debate that if you believe it was possible that he could come back from that debate, the only scenario where he could is if he played perfect baseball from here on out. And this is like one more. We're talking about it, right? And I know, if we're talking about it, then obviously we're not the only ones.
Well, Barack Obama and George Clooney and many others are also talking about it, which I'm sure we'll come to. But no, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, my read on the press conference is that it felt like every other press conference Biden had given prior to the debate over the last 3 years, in that, was it a terrible, catastrophic embarrassment like the debate was? Certainly not. There was nothing too woeful about it, but was it good? Did it feel becoming of someone who could serve? Did it feel like an indication that he can serve another 4 years in office successfully, as he keeps insisting? Absolutely not. And there are plenty of but beyond that, there are many other embarrassing moments, embarrassing slips of the tongue, which I think the novelty has certainly worn off for people at this point after his performance a week and a half ago. And all of this, none of this, again, especially as his party continues, especially as an increasingly large number of figures in and around the Democratic Party call for him to step down. It's a reminder that none of this is normal, and all of us deserve better than what we're seeing from him and what we've been seeing from Trump over the last 8 years.
We're going to get to that later. If you're like, why is Matt Lewis supporting Donald Trump? We're going to get to him. But we'll get to that in a second. Look, part of it is Joe Biden has been making weird gaffes like this forever. Like, do you remember Stand Up for Chuck or Chuck Stand Up? Do you remember that?
So, Chuck Graham, state senator's here. Chuck, stand up. Chuck, good to see you. Oh, God love you. What am I talking about? I tell you what, you're making everybody else stand up, though, pal. Thank you very, very much.
This is like 15 years ago. Biden is speaking, and there was a guy like in a wheelchair, and Biden is urging him to stand up. So he's been making weird flubs and gaffes. So it's hard to say, like, would a young Biden have made the same mistake? Possibly. But again, he can't afford anything that reinforces this dangerous narrative about his cognitive decline. I will say, and I'll probably put a little clip of this maybe in right here. I watched a video the other day, a short clip of Biden debating Paul Ryan in 2012.
Recently,
Mitt Romney.
7% rating.
Mitt Romney.
We immediately went out and rescued General Motors. We went ahead and made sure that we cut taxes for the middle class. And in addition to that, when that occurred, what did Romney do? Romney said, no, let Detroit go bankrupt. We moved in and helped people refinance their homes. Governor Romney said, no, let foreclosures hit the bottom. But it shouldn't be surprising for a guy who says 47% of the American people are unwilling to take responsibility for their own lives. My friend recently in a speech in Washington said 30% of the American people are takers.
And that was just, what, a dozen years ago. It's not that long ago. But it was amazing night and day. I mean, Biden was so sharp and such a good debater and just looked so different, so energetic. And so although on one hand, Biden has always been a gaffe machine, he also has clearly declined since then.
I mean, I think your first point there, Matt, is critical because anyone who's old enough to remember the 2020 election campaign, as we both are, conveniently enough, will recall that almost every week or every other week, there was a piece in major outlets, Politico, other outlets like that weren't entirely supportive of Biden's candidacy, and many of which were skeptical of it right from the beginning. We're constantly running articles about his history as a gaffe machine and how the race continued to add to that. And look, here's a giant list of all the embarrassing moments in Biden's public life since he first held office. But I think you're absolutely right. That may have been even endearing to some people or just acceptable or easy to laugh at, but you could still go, well, yes, he makes silly mistakes, but hey, he's a doddering old man. He's good-natured. He's a lot better than that other guy over there we've had to put up with for the past 4 years. But in this case, we've been putting up with Biden for the past 4 years. And after the calamity that we saw 2 weeks ago, now the novelty is worn off, but that's not quite the right turn of phrase. Now, the context has simply changed. The narrative around it in the media, which is also key, has changed. And it doesn't seem warm and amusing and innocent anymore. Now it seems like a sinister indication of something else, and that's going to work against them in the public view.
All right, so here's the other, I think, less glaring gaffe from Thursday night.
I wouldn't have picked Vice President Trump to be vice president, but I think she was not qualified to be president. So let's start there.
Not great, but I don't think that's as bad as the Putin announcement.
I mean, yeah, I agree. I mean, I'd rather he didn't say either, but I agree with you, Matt. Definitely not as bad.
So since he didn't mention Kamala Harris, but since he was alluding to Kamala Harris, it does seem that the cleanest, less chaotic, less dramatic option for Democrats, if they are able to dispatch Joe Biden, would be to go to Kamala Harris.
I don't think, and we did talk about this last time, I do not think Biden will step down. I think unless Biden becomes debilitated in some way or something serious happens to impair him, I don't think he's going to give up on the race and relinquish the reins of power, because why would he? Biden, for his entire career, has been driven by the pursuit of power, has been driven by the pursuit of prestige and authority. He's always been a little bit kooky, a little bit odd in some ways. He has a track record of not just of making gaffes, but of saying some pretty strange things in public spaces and public interviews over the years. There's a great, I can't remember, I want to say Peggy Noonan wrote it, but that's obviously not right. I think it was Kitty Kelly wrote quite a colorful profile of Biden in the 70s that people can find online. I think it's called The All-American Boy or something like that, that shows that gives quite a revealing insight into Biden's character and Biden's history. So there's absolutely no reason to believe that Biden will step down, and Biden has reaffirmed on multiple occasions, not just in that press conference, that he isn't going to step down. The question of whether he should, I think, are there more viable candidates? Certainly. I mean, obviously, anyone who's barely alive and mildly more coherent and more presentable would be a better option and a more viable candidate. But I think that all of the discourse around this, we aren't really acknowledging the fact that the whole idea of replacing an incumbent president with a different candidate right at the end of a presidential race is just absolutely insane on the face of it. I mean, obviously, if Biden agrees to it, can it be done? Can you create a way to do it? Yes, but optically, will it look good? Is it a good idea? I'm not convinced that it is, and I'm also not convinced. I think the idea of Michelle Obama coming in, I maintain that that's just a fantasy, and I think that if it's Kamala, if it's another candidate that other members of the Democratic establishment might prefer, I think that a lot of people are going to react quite negatively to it, and that public perception of it is not going to be as inherently positive as I think a lot of the dialogue around this has assumed it will be. I think people are going to feel like they're being cheated and like they're being put on and like they've been essentially sold a bill of goods for the entire rest of the presidential race, for the entirety of Biden's presidency. And the Democrats have been playing this long game of trying to manipulate everything, and now they just have to buy into it. And I think there's a solid chance that people will react against that, especially if Trump is able to restrain his worst impulses over the next few months.
Well, I mean, Democrats did it, 25 years ago with Robert Torricelli in New Jersey, where he had a scandal very late. They replaced him and actually won that Senate, retained that Senate seat. And it was looking really bad and effectively stole a seat. And it was even, a little questionable as to whether you could technically even pull it off, make that maneuver that late in the game. And look, I think that part of it is that in the Trump era, Democrats have been cast as the serious, stable party, and Republicans were kind of the exciting, crazy party. So this does cut against that current brand. But one could argue that Biden is so bad right now, and that the American public likes excitement. They can adapt quickly to change. And look, I think Trump, if you ask me, I think Trump wants Biden to stay where he is. And it doesn't mean that Trump wouldn't pounce on Kamala or Gretchen Whitmer or Gavin Newsom or Josh Shapiro, that they might dig up some dirt that we don't even know about on some of these candidates. Like, of course, Trump is going to do Trump things, regardless of who the Democrats put up against him. But I think Trump, given his druthers, Trump and his team would prefer Joe Biden be the Democratic nominee. And I'm of the opinion that it's generally a good idea not to do what your opponent wants you to do. Anyway, that's my take. I think Democrats would be better off making the switch. But look, Biden holds the cards. If he refuses to go, then I mean, I guess they could invoke, the 25th Amendment, but that's not going to happen. So if he doesn't want to leave, then there's nothing they can do. And they better, at that point, Democrats have to quit attacking him, because then they're going to cost him the election, the slim chance he has.
And when do they decide to stop attacking him, and when do they finally accept it, right? If he isn't willing to step down. But I think to what you just said, Matt, I think that's definitely an interesting perspective. I think that Trump's big advantage right now is that the best thing Trump can do is more or less just stay quiet and let this chaos play out, and let the Democratic Party self-destruct, and let that self-destruction and Biden's self-destruction consume all of the oxygen of publicity, so that it isn't on Trump. And the fact that Trump was just convicted in a criminal court mere weeks ago, and he's running to be president of the United States. It's an interesting change in Trump, and I'm sure it's a consequence of the advisors Trump has surrounded himself with being quite shrewd. Trump seemed, even though there were plenty of things to pick out of Trump's performance in the debate, overall he seemed more relaxed. He seemed obedient of the rules. He seemed less like a badger. He seemed to, by the standards of Trump, to be more or less on his best behavior. And if he can inhibit himself and moderate in some ways while the Democratic Party as the Democratic Party continues to collapse and flail and is incapable of addressing this issue, then it's only going to work in his favor.
You mentioned earlier that George Clooney put out this, I guess, was like an op-ed in the New York Times saying that Biden needs to get out, that he had been at a fundraiser with him 3 weeks earlier, and that wasn't the Joe Biden he used to know. On Morning Joe this week, they said that there are people in Biden world who believe that Barack Obama is orchestrating this whole thing.
I'll say one thing that we do have to underline here, just so viewers can follow what's going on behind the scenes, is the Biden campaign and many Democratic officials do believe that Barack Obama is quietly working behind the scenes to orchestrate this.
Also on MSNBC, Chris Matthews made the case, which I think is maybe the most compelling argument for sticking with Joe Biden.
He is a politician who's been good at it. He's been reelected every time since then in Delaware with pretty healthy majorities. In life, he lost his wife and he lost his daughter, and he found Jill. Now, who's he going to listen to, Jill or George Clooney? I'm telling you, it's personal. He's had the elite, and it's so true about the elite. He is absolutely right about the elite. Look at President Obama. He served for 8 years loyally, and yet Obama backed Hillary Clinton for president and didn't back him. But I hear he never even invited him upstairs. He had a good reason to be resentful, but he isn't. He puts up with it with the elite. But right now, he's got the poor people. He's got minorities. He's got Hispanics. He's going to put out the labor. He's going to hold that base of the Democratic Party, which he will need in November. And I'm telling you, people are going to end up rooting for him in October because he will have a comeback. And in this elite fashioned attack on him, they're going to pay for it. But in the end, they're going to end up voting for him. So I think Biden will be the little guy. He'll be the Democrat in this race, the true Democrat. And he's going to get people to turn for him in October. It's going to be stunning. He is not quitting. He is not built to quit.
They're going to end up voting for him, I think, is a good line. And I don't think Matthews is necessarily wrong about that. I mean, I do think, the first part of his disquisition there is correct, is entirely correct. That Biden, throughout his entire political career, has always been the man left standing after everything collapsed, after everything implodes around him. And we saw this on multiple occasions throughout the 2020 campaign. And it's easy to forget that his campaign in 2020 was deficient and quite limp in many different ways. And there were many embarrassing moments, many moments where it seemed like he would quite clearly not be the nominee. I think in this situation, the question is, but at the same time, everything is dependent on context. And I think the difference is that in this situation, 4 years ago, at this stage of the campaign, all of the attention was on Donald Trump. And Donald Trump was self-destructing in many ways. And Donald Trump was making many terrible decisions and engaging regularly in just completely foolhardy behavior, embarrassing himself publicly, and mishandling things, either on COVID, on the way he responded to George Floyd and the riots, and then, of course, for his dismal debate performance that year. The pressure was on Trump, the negative attention was on Trump, and Biden was able to sit back and relax and look like a compelling and refreshing alternative in comparison. Now, however, the roles have flipped, at least for the time being. And the roles hadn't flipped, again, just a few weeks ago when it was Trump being convicted and all of the media coverage was on Trump and how reprehensible Trump is. Now, Trump can sit back and put his feet up and watch Biden undergo a similar series of setbacks. And so the question is, are those setbacks in this situation, are those setbacks enough to undermine Biden in a way that he hasn't been undermined before? Or ultimately, in comparison to Trump, will Biden's general lack of color and general blandness still ultimately enable him to succeed as he has done many times before? I think Matthews makes an interesting point.
And speaking of Donald Trump, the Republican convention's about to kick off. We still don't know who the running mate is going to be. It's going to kick off next week. Trump was on the radio with Fox's Brian Kilmeade. Kilmeade asked him an interesting question, and we'll play it. We'll talk after it's over.
Mr. President, also, when you talk about a finalist for this, I'm wondering if it factors in that Joe Biden might not be the nominee. And does that factor in who you pick? Because a lot of people think it's got to be Kamala to be number one. She goes and picks a battleground state governor like Shapiro or Whitmer. Does that change your thinking? Maybe you need Virginia and you might want to go get a Youngkin.
I don't think it does. I'm asked that question a lot. Am I waiting for that, for the axe to fall? And frankly, I'm amazed that I hope he can carry it on. I just assume we planned for him, but whether we plan for him or anyone else, the planning, I think, is the same. It's a policy that the Democrats have: open borders, high taxes, high interest rates, being weak on foreign. I mean, look at how bad they're laughed at by everybody. This guy is walking around being laughed at by the leaders. I know all these leaders. He's being laughed at by the leaders of foreign countries. It's ridiculous that he's our president.
Well, look, I think Trump I think Trump is telling the truth there when he says that he's not factoring in the possibility that Biden might be replaced. I don't think that's at all factored into who Trump is going to select as his nominee. Maybe you disagree. I will say I'm going to stick. I think I've publicly said I'm betting on Doug Burgum, the North Dakota governor. But I have to say, this past week, it seems more like the wind is blowing J.D. Vance's direction, based on it's a little hints here and there. What's your pick right now?
Well, I am still very skeptical of the idea that it will be J.D. Vance, although nothing is impossible. And with how Trump has just continued his evolution over the last 4 years, I definitely wouldn't rule it out. But again, as we've said before, I just believe, and I do think this is right, that Trump wants a vice president who, one, won't steal any of his attention, and two, will be able to serve insofar as a vice presidential pick is useful or relevant at all in deciding the result of an election. He'll want a vice presidential pick who can be seen as a balancing force or a moderating force to his own excesses and his own chaos in some way. And Burgum would be a good replacement for Pence in that regard.
All right, so we're both Burgum, which means it'll be J.D. Vance. But okay, that's fine.
Right.
That's fine. Now, if you are if you are someone who is, so here's my guess: if you are watching this and you are a huge Biden fan, you have stopped watching this already. But if you've stuck with us, I do want to say you might be watching this and you might be saying, okay, Biden's old, we get it. but Donald Trump is an existential threat. Donald Trump is a serious threat, and you and Guy are engaging in this horse race kind of politics stuff and who's going to be Veep and all that, but this is serious. And I want you to know this is not funny. I actually agree with you. And I want to play this clip. This is a guy named Mike Davis. Do you know who Mike Davis is? Are you familiar with him?
Yes, vaguely.
He is, so he's on this Benny Johnson show. But Mike Davis is apparently being considered to be Trump's attorney general, I believe. This is not a gadfly. This is somebody who worked, I think, for Chuck Grassley. He was part of kind of the conservative legal intellectual movement. I'm saying that because what I'm about to play for you, well, I'll get your reaction. This is Mike Davis talking to Benny Johnson.
Mike, I've never called for lava to rain down from the heavens, but maybe upon Washington, D.C. Would you be that sweet red hot lava for us?
I've never been called sweet, and you call me Sweet Ginger. So I think I meant, Ben, during my 3-week reign of terror as Trump acting attorney general, before I get chased out of town with my Trump pardon, I will rain hell on Washington, D.C. Number 3, we're going to deport. We're going to deport a lot of people, 10 million people and growing, anchor babies, their parents, their grandparents. We're going to put kids in cages. It's going to be glorious. We're going to detain a lot of people in the D.C. Gulag and Gitmo. And list number 5, I'm going to recommend a lot of pardons. Every January 6th defendant is going to get a pardon, especially my hero Hornman. He is definitely at the top of the pardon list.
All right, so that was a condensed version. The full version is no more comforting, let me assure you. But this is what could happen. I don't think it's crazy to think that if Trump becomes president again, he will be staffed and surrounded by people like this guy. What do you say to that? How's, like, Democrats, there's a world where we're not talking about Joe Biden's age, but the mainstream media is talking about this.
Well, I say if he wants to deport people, don't let him listen to this show, because that might not work out so well for me. No, I think that's absolutely right. And the greatest danger of a second Trump term has always been the prospect of who Trump could surround himself with, rather than necessarily the prospect of Trump becoming president again. Because even though that's an incredibly grim prospect in many ways, and it's obviously not something either of us want to happen, largely throughout most of his first term, and I'm sure this will annoy some people, but I don't think it's wrong. Even with January 6th, I think the American system of government, the governmental framework, is robust and strong and durable enough that it managed to restrain and inhibit a lot of his worst impulses. Not his worst, not maybe the worst aspects of his character and his personality and his outspokenness, but in terms of a lot of what he was actually able to do, he was more or less held in check by the various systems. But the question is, but he was also surrounded at various points throughout his administration by reasonably intelligent, accomplished, somewhat moderate Republicans and establishment Republicans. Will that be the case the second time around?
No.
I would not count on it. And even though I think, as we touched on a bit before, I think Trump has tried somewhat to affect a slightly more moderate image in the aftermath of a debate than he was beforehand. He's been sort of distancing himself a bit from the Heritage Foundation's Project 2025 stuff lately, although whether he would actually continue to distance himself from it if he was reelected, is anyone's guess. But again, we know that this is someone who can't string 2 sentences together without one of them being a lie. We know that this is someone completely mercurial, someone who only cares about his own power and his own authority and his own estimation in the eyes of other people. There's certainly no reason to believe that the safe bet is that things will get a lot crazier, not that they'll be more sane than the first time he was in office.
Well, speaking of crazy, You drive us wild. We drive you crazy. That's what we do here 24/7. Guy Denton, it's cold gin time again, my friend. Anything you want to plug or any final thoughts?
Nothing right now, really. I have a couple of projects I'm working on, but I'm sure we'll come to them on subsequent episodes. Anything for you, Matt?
I have a new piece out at The Hill pointing out how Joe Biden is acting and looking like Donald Trump, and Democrats are, in some cases, responding to Biden's Trumpiness the way that Republicans responded to Trump and all the gaslighting and all that stuff. So check that out at The Hill. And I think that is it for us, Guy Denton. I shall see you next week, my friend.
Looking forward to it, Matt. Always good to be in the wrong place.
At the wrong time. See you next week in the wrong stuff.
If you like what you heard here today, please make sure to follow the show, subscribe to the show, leave a like, review the show wherever you get your podcast, and also please smash that like button, or whatever the people my age are saying. I don't know. I am a Kiss fan after all. But nonetheless, you can also follow us on X at WrongStuffPod, or drop us a note. Fawning praise or scornful disdain, we accept both, at thewrongstuffpod, all one word, at gmail.com. Thank you so much for listening. We're looking forward to next time.